first, and then I will intro the podcast.
Sure.
All right, so hello everybody who's watching the replay of this live stream. I'm with Gerrard Gosens, and we're going to talk about something that was absolutely extraordinary to me when I met him at Chocolate Moments on 117 Albert Street in Brisbane. And we're going to get into that on the podcast because right now we're live streaming the recording of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. So if you're watching this replay, hit the thumbs up, get subscribed to this channel if you aren't already, if you like this kind of material. And we're going to talk about really something that blew me away, which was the idea of someone who is congenitally blind, has a great memory, and when I asked him about it, he said that, well, he just visualizes in his mind. And I just thought, how does that work? Let's have a podcast episode. So we're going to start recording that podcast episode now. And if you're joining us, hit the thumbs up and let me know where you are in the world, and we'll start recording the podcast. So let me know where you are in the world, and we'll start recording the podcast. So that starts now. By the way, I record the intro and the outro later, so we can just jump in. Gerrard, thanks so much for joining us on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast.
No problem.
Absolutely excited to speak with you, and as you know, this is largely because we were at Chocolate Moments at your Belgian chocolate specialty store.
That's right. And the actual logo is Moments That Make Memories.
Right, yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, we got to talking about chocolate and memory and so forth.
Yes.
And what astonished me, Heather is your wife, yes? She just said, this is a small business. And I said, yeah, we have a small business as well. And so we got to talking about what I do in memory training. And she said, oh, Gerrard has an amazing memory. And then we just went from there. And I said, well, how does this work? And you're particularly good with numbers, as I recall. And you said, well, I see images in my mind, or I visualize certain things. And I just thought, well, I definitely have to get you on the podcast.
Sure.
And one of the main reasons why is that I'm not astonished by that, because I'm pretty low in my imagination and on the visual threshold. But there's a lot of people who say they don't see images in their mind and they could never use memory techniques. But I know that scientifically what counts as a mental image is very multisensory. So I wanted to hear more about your perspective, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do so.
Sure.
So maybe let's get into that, but let's start with you and your story and how that you came to do so many extraordinary things. What's your sort of first memory of wanting to do extraordinary things?
I think for me, I always talk about perhaps my very first day at primary school, where as a young kid, I always, being totally blind from birth, I thought it was quite normal to walk around the farm and every now and again bump into a half-open door or a post, and that came with the traits of being a very young kid. And it wasn't until that very first day of primary school where the teacher had a very innovative thought about burning out some nervous energy of students, obviously being away from mum and dad for the first time. So she took us down to the oval, and there we were required to run a lap of the oval just to burn out some nervous energy, and off we went, and laughing and giggling, and I was sort of following the sound of my fellow peers and jogging around the oval. And well, it's the first day I ever realised and obviously first met the goalposts in the oval. I ran into every single one, and it taught me very quickly, obviously there were a lot more things I had to experience and overcome, and obviously there's going to be I suppose what you call the facts of life, where things can and will go astray. And from there I knew I had to break down some of the perceptions amongst the students and the staff within the primary school about what I could achieve on the sporting arena, as well as also within the classroom. And also taught me about my surroundings and had to be aware of what was around me, so I had to use my memory of not only obviously what it felt like, but also the things that were around it. What was the terrain like? For example, was the grass particularly longer around where the goalposts were located, or was the ground softer, or were there particular trees which I could use as a surrounding point to say, okay, well, I'm very close to those trees, I'm very close to the goalposts. So from there, at an early age, it taught me about my memory and how I had to use my other, I suppose, senses and my visualization within my head to work out where I was and where I was going.
Right. So when you say visualization in your head, what does that mean to you, and what's going on? How would you describe that?
Because I think obviously there are certain points in a day where pictures can be created. So on a windy day, obviously you can hear the leaves rustling, you can hear the trees moving, whether it be through the wind, whether it be on a rainy day, you can hear the rain hitting the grass and creating pictures. So on a rainy day, it's fantastic when the water's hitting the pavements or the roofs of the houses. That creates a mental picture in the house that sort of almost provides you with a picture of what's around you. And the same also on a school ground basketball court, because obviously you can then create a picture because it's hitting the asphalt and it's hitting the grass, so there's a different sound there. So for me, and even for example, let's look at numbers. You can feel a number, so you can create that picture in your head. So getting from point A to point B is about being able to visualize where things are, using those other senses that are around me, and obviously it always wasn't going to be perfect because of days when you aren't feeling so flash, you're a bit fatigued, as well hydrated, you're distracted, you're upset by something, so those things that can distract you.
Well, that's a good point. I think that happens to all of us.
Mm.
I'm kind of curious, so when you say you feel numbers, what does, say, the number 6 feel like?
Oh, I can feel it because I've actually, sort of my hand's been felt around. I've actually been able to, thankfully in primary school, let's say where it'd be number 6, I was able to feel the outline of a trace of a number 6. Or when I was learning countries around the world, they would actually run a hard pen around the trace around the actual map, so I could feel what Australia or Canada felt like, and we can divide it up so we could use the lines and the imprint, so I could feel what that was actually like. But I suppose as a both now as a parent and as a young kid, as soon as things became bigger than the actual palm, that's when you became very difficult to create an entire picture. So that's where the wind and rain were very helpful.
Right.
So for example, I could put my hand on a tree, but I can't feel the whole tree. But when it rains, that creates a picture.
I get it. So there's a kind of sense of maybe size coming from distances between sound? Or?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
And it's the same where it be even indoors, where it be on a dance floor. When I did, I had the chance to compete on Dancing with the Stars.
Right, I want to talk about this.
And when I did Dancing with the Stars, it wasn't, for me, it was about the memory of the steps. It wasn't about what it looked like. Right. It was okay, it was about, and it was interesting when I did Dancing with the Stars, where people learn in different ways and remember things in different ways. My professional dancer at the time wanted me to learn the entire dance, and then we'll come back and we'll do all the small stuff, as in, okay, this is how your hand's held, this is where your body should be positioned. But for me, it was about learning a piece, doing it exactly right, then moving on to the next piece, doing exactly right, and then pulling it all together. So it was interesting to see how people had been trained and how their memories were through their upbringing, through their own lessons in dancing, whereas coming in from the cold, I've been trained obviously in different ways, whether it be in project management or in sport. That's how I learned it.
Right. So I've seen a picture of you in a dance pose,
yes,
expertly holding in a position, just what's happening in your mind that you remember not just the steps, but the actual positionality?
Because it was on the dance floor, it was done through how that felt for me. And it was quite interesting that, for example, in dance, and I'm putting my fingers in a certain way now, that people said to me, okay, well, that's how you're supposed to hold your fingers in dance. Well, for me, as a blind person, I think, well, how does that look good? But apparently on a camera, it does.
Right,
And that's the way you do it. But, on the dance floor, I was also using the other things that were around me, whether it be the sound of the air conditioner coming through the ceiling, whether it be the sound of the audience that were sitting in the seats, whether it be the movement of the cameras that were following on the floor. The major challenge was obviously having a live band. That took away a lot of hearing, so it was the other senses that took into, I suppose, a large function of, okay, what can I do? What can I use that were going to be assets to me on the floor?
Right. Well, it's interesting you show that hand motion, and how could that possibly look good to an audience or on the camera?
Yeah.
And we were talking about magic before.
Yes.
And in magic, it's the same way. Like, even though I can see what I'm supposed to look like, like, it's very counterintuitive, and it makes no sense. And you have to sort of rewire or unwire your thinking because if you do anything but that movement, as weird as it looks to you, you will not create the illusion or the effect that's looking that the audience is looking for. So
I think, from my memory perspective, that because I have to rely a lot on there are certain things which I will, for example, maybe hear or learn, but that won't be a necessary, almost be like I suppose, a preservative in what I have to remember. Whereas there are going to be some of the critical ingredients of some things, whether it be if I'm walking to a bus stop or walking to a particular location, okay, what does it feel like? What does it smell like? What's around me? And it's the same where it be in learning. I've done 2 degrees at university, and back in those days it was, okay, what's the best way to learn the text? What's the best way to, I suppose, commit it to memory?
right,
And there were different experiences around it. It was because you were always learning about from an audio perspective, people who would read books on the tape. So, okay, well, what can I take from that piece? What was the person's voice like?
right,
How were they saying it? So there's always, and I think now as human beings we've become almost obese, I suppose, in our intake of things that are around us, as in we're obese in, okay, we've got so much reliance on iPhones and tablets and computers, so we don't have to remember. So that's where the fat goes.
right. Yeah, it's interesting how we're being de-skilled in a sense, and
we're not mentally fit.
right. Yeah, we were talking a lot about mental fitness earlier and different ways to do it through multisensory means.
Yeah.
Which leads me. I mean, there's just so many questions. So forgive me if I'm just super excited here. But all of this is not just mental fitness that you've developed in order to get 2 degrees and start a business and so forth. But tell me about running, for example, and swimming and that physical fitness and how that works to not just do the activity of running and swimming, but sort of how you're navigating and what memory tools might be involved there.
My memory tools in swimming are, for example, I don't go by, people go, oh, you can't strokes and what. No, I don't. And the reason being is because a whole heap of factors that may be in play with that, depending on the speed work we're doing or the actual particular set. So I go by the sound of the water. So I actually use for my own memory how that water sounds. So, for example, water will sound differently in shallow water compared to deep water.
Right.
Whereas if I went to a place, there's a place called Chandler Swimming Pool. Now that has the same depth of water at both ends. It would take me a little bit if I went there just to get used to it. Right. But places where shallow at one end and deep at end takes just 2 laps and then I'm fine. I memorise the water depth, I memorise the sound, and I know exactly when I'm at the end of each end of the pool. And it's the same if I'm, I suppose, running in a race. I'll memorise the course, I'll memorise the terrain, whether it be a gutter or it be a particular sort of camber in the actual road. I'll use those features to let me know where I am, whereas people can see. It was interesting, I was listening to a speaker talk about markers on a road when people do a fun run. Right. And visually from their own memory, that lets them, I suppose, have their own dose of dopamine. Right. Whereas for a person who's totally blind, I have no dopamine doses because I can't see where I'm at. So I have to use the other things around me to get that dose of dopamine.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about running here too, though, we're not talking about from a track. We're talking about from Brisbane to other cities like Canberra.
Yeah, Cairns to Brisbane, yeah.
Or like, whoa, so all the way that far.
Yeah, 2,000 Ks.
2,000 kilometers.
Yeah, 5 times.
5 times, right, yeah. So, I mean, how do you come up with that idea? Just where's the origin of this story?
I think for me it's always been about the opportunity, and for me it was it wasn't sort of a bucket list that I said, okay, I've got to run from Cairns to Brisbane 5 times. Those opportunities arose, and when I left high school, my goal was to compete in an ultra marathon, and then from a preparation perspective, both mentally and physically, I had to prepare for it. So I embarked upon my first ever major ultra marathon with the support from the Army. They were my forward crew, camp crew, runners, cooks, I had 35 soldiers at my beck and call for 5 years.
Wow.
And they were sensational. And from there, obviously, it led on to competing for Australia at 3 Paralympic Games, and now I'm going for my 4th and final one in Tokyo in 2020, and a number of world championships and flying planes around Queensland.
Right.
So I've done a whole range of things, and climbing Everest. These weren't sort of things where I go, oh, that's on my bucket list. It was just about the opportunities that came up.
Right.
And all those things involved memory, not only from a logistical perspective, but also from a navigational perspective. Even, for example, going to a hotel, like I'm doing quite a bit of traveling next week, and just going to a hotel room, okay, if I'm walking, let's say, for example, I take my guide dog to the toilet outside, and I walk back into the hotel room and I go to my particular floor, okay, because all hotel rooms don't necessarily have raised numbers on the doors,
right.
I have to use my senses around me, okay, hemiceps, or was there air conditioning on that particular part of the ceiling, or what did it feel like when I got to that part of the corridor?
So let me seize upon this. When you talk about counting steps and you have a good memory for remembering numbers, what do you do to remember that number of steps?
I think it's just putting into blocks, into patterns. Okay, whether it be 15, 10, 5, whatever it may be. But also you have to be aware there's going to be situations. Let's say, for example, I walked out of a hotel room and I walked a certain distance, whether it be by steps or by feel of the actual roads I'm going across. There's going to be a person who may, for example, walk towards you, or a group of people, so that's going to take your steps out. So you have to be aware of those landmarkers that are around you. It could be, for example, when you walk down the road, a bus is going through a puddle,
right?
And you'll use that as a landmark.
Right. Okay.
And being mentally aware of your whole surrounds.
Right.
And sighted people tend to be, because our visual cortex is taken up by 2/3 of our brain.
Right.
We tend not to use the other third of other senses to take in those other senses, because we're so visually distracted by what's in front of us, and that's it.
Right. Yeah, we were just talking about this in the shopping mall, because one of your stores is in a shopping mall environment, and you were talking about how frustrating it is to sometimes see these people lost.
Yeah, it's a straight road, and it's not even a road; it's a mall.
Right.
It's not as if they're sort of the mall is just bricks. There's no cars that go down it, and there's two stages in the mall, and it's not exactly long. It's only sort of 800 meters long, and people still get lost, and because they're visually overloaded with for sale and specials and whatever it may be, and they just forget where they are. And yet the mall actually goes to walk from Edward Street up to George Street. It's actually uphill,
right?
And that's all you need to know. Okay, am I downhill or uphill?
Right.
As simple as that.
It's amazing. Well, one of the things that comes to mind with that is there's a condition that's often talked about by people who find me on the internet called aphantasia, which means the lack of a mind's eye. And they often turn this into a barrier. But there's a magician named Pendulette who apparently has aphantasia, and he said that he's very good at navigating airports, but that's only after it's been verbalized. And so there's something about this not leaning so heavily on one's visual capacities. And I noticed when you describe this, you're marking the distance on your arm, or describing different things by gesturing. And you even said earlier when we were talking that it frustrates you when you see these people. So it seems to me that there's a lot of conceptual and physical or kinesthetic things going on all at the same time.
There's a thing called shadow vision.
Shadow vision.
And shadow vision isn't seeing shadows.
Right.
Shadow vision is being able to sense the things that are around you and not being able to sense. So, for example, if I put you inside a cardboard box, you can feel the four walls around you.
Right.
Whereas when I go running down the road with my guides, I can run past the car and I can say, hey, listen, that was a sedan, that was a wagon, or that was a four-wheel drive.
Wow.
Purely because of the space it's taking up.
Right.
So if I put my hand obviously in front of my face, you can feel that the space is taking up.
Right.
And you can shadow vision, if your body is alert it's refreshed, it's well. Shadow version works really, really well. If you're fatigued, again, that shadow vision isn't going to be as sharp as what it can be.
Right.
It's about developing that tool.
Right. So that's interesting.
It's like when people say to them, they say, "Hey, I can feel like someone's following me."
Right.
It's because of the space that they're taking up.
Right.
That's behind them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes I'm waving in front, and I'm just saying hello to people that I saw. Like Brunheimer joined us on the live stream that we're recording right now, and just waved. I don't know if you perceived that, but I felt like you perceived it and was maybe thinking, "What the heck is he doing?" But in any case, another thing that I don't want to lose in the thread is this idea of dopamine spikes. And so you don't have visual markers to help you get those dopamine spikes, but say a little bit more about what it is that you're using to help that.
I'm using the reinforcements for the other things. It could be a down curve. It could be, you said before, in the afternoon you love those birds that are in the trees, right?
Right.
I love driving past, for example, on the north side near Chermside Shopping Centre, or there's thousands of birds in the trees. They're so loud that you can hardly hear yourself speak. I love them because that again creates a picture of the tree.
Right.
Because all the birds in there, so you know exactly how big the tree is. So my dopamine spikes are, it could be, if I'm driving a taxi, it could be the particular pothole they go through, because I memorise where that pothole is.
Right.
Or they're driven past, or in the city, for example, maybe we'll pass a particular cafe that loves cooking, I don't know, a particular waffle, or loves cooking particular chicken, or grilled, or does their particular chips. You can use all those landmarkers, or a chemist that you can smell the drugs coming out of, or a newspaper shop or a magazine shop that books smell.
Right. So then, what is the strategy to ensure that you have enough dopamine spikes when you go to Japan? I assume you haven't run that route in Japan before.
No. But we are going across there earlier next year, yeah. So I'll be going across there to get used to the course, and
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And it's the same with a fun run, or once I've done a fun run once, I know exactly what to expect and what to do with it. So and not only does that create a mental picture, but also it creates that that sense of excitement, because you're not nervous, you're actually excited by the opportunity, and that creates the opportunity to have those dopamine drops where your actual body is feeling, okay, this is good.
Right. So, I mean, this is a performance strategy in life. How does this apply to what you do professionally and in business?
I think for me, obviously working as a project manager, it's because obviously every project has a conclusion. So there along the course you can see the various progressions in the actual project. Whereas being a chocolate maker, for example, I don't have a recipe. I know the basics of it, but the reason why I don't have a recipe is because things change all the time. So, for example, you go and buy an orange today, and you buy it in 4 weeks' time, it's going to taste different because of the time of the season.
Right.
Same with strawberries, same with pineapples. All those different fruits have different intensities throughout the year. So we use, it could be 600 grams of orange. Next week it could be 750, because it's all done on taste.
Right.
And I have to make sure the consistency and the strength of that taste is always there for my people who are buying the chocolates, because I don't want them going, I wonder what that was once. I'm not really sure what that tastes like. Sort of
Right.
where people have to. And this is interesting about memory, is that people who will go and buy, for example, a box of chocolates, they often go to the catalogue or the menu to reinforce their memory of what it tastes like. They go, oh, that one had stripes on it, so it must have been a caramel one. So they actually reinforce their memory.
Right.
Which I find really funny.
And of course, if as a person who serves the public, if you make that kind of mistake, they can remember that forever too, which is a potential recipe for disaster, so to speak.
And people, even for example, when they go to a restaurant and they have pictures on, like you look at McDonald's, right, and Kentucky Fried Chicken, they give you a picture so that you hopefully remember what it tastes like.
Right.
So they're reinforcing the visual cortex with the actual picture. Okay, that's what it tastes like.
Right. Well, what's the origin of you getting into business, and why chocolate?
Chocolate was about an opportunity, because when I was travelling around the world, and still I competing for Australia, it was very difficult to walk into a store and pick up a statue or a T-shirt of for a friend, because I would have no idea whether it was really cool or not so good.
Right.
So chocolate was always an easy thing to pick up around the world. Different countries had different tastes, different experiences. So you had different memories about, for example, if you buy chocolate from Switzerland, the memory is very different from that because they use a lot more cream, whereas something like obviously the UK, a lot more sugar, Belgium, far much more cocoa, the same with the Dutch, Germans, it depends on what they're sort of making, more into their sort of pralines. And came out to Australia, opportunity rose, and got into chocolate, and here we are, almost 10 years later.
Wow. So, what's your understanding of the relationship between chocolate and memory? Is it true that it helps memory?
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, and not only from its antioxidants and also from the free radicals, but also I think, if you're going to eat quality chocolate, I think, there's so many different taste sensations with chocolate from around the world. Like there's a chocolate belt, and you can use those different tasting notes as you can with wine, to intensify the actual taste of a chocolate. So, Tanzania chocolate's different to Madagascar to Ecuador to Venezuela. That all have very different tasting notes,
right.
and they create a different memory. People will go, oh, I like that one because of that. And it's the same when I'm inventing chocolates. I use 6 different Australian beers, and people come back because they remember the taste, not the look.
Right, okay.
And that's what I want them to remember, not what it looked like, because I've seen so many people who were tricked by, they'll go and buy a red isopol, and they'll go, because it looked good, and must have tasted like raspberry, whereas I've tasted it and it tastes like nothing.
Right.
And because their memory says red is raspberry, raspberry's good, their memory's telling them that.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Maybe because I don't know why, but I so far I've had from your store the frog.
Yeah.
And one of those wavy bars.
Yes.
And the cigar.
Yes.
And to me, I really love the cigar the best.
Yes.
The dark chocolate one.
Yes.
And also, it was the one that didn't have
dairy-free and
dairy-free and gluten-free.
Yeah.
And something to me that I thought of, so I remembered how much that I like it, was Freud had said, Sigmund Freud, the psychologist, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, so that I would deepen into my memory just how much I loved it. But technically, it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a cigar.
That's right.
It's
yes.
some other deeper choices in there.
And it's the same with people, as I said, going back to McDonald's or going to those pictures, they'll go back on something purely because how it looked.
Right.
So many people who go to the fast food places go, I'm never eating that again.
Right.
I'm never eating that again. I feel so bad. But then they go back and look at the picture and goes, oh, that looks good. I get it.
Right. Well,
it's amazing how people, and for example, people structure their memories in different ways. So, like, if a person says to me, tells me a phone number in a certain way, I say, no. Tell me as in 0407 and then 3 and 3.
Right.
That's the way I remember it in patterns.
Right.
Whereas people will remember, sometimes 2 by 2, would it be the whole number. We all can compartmentalize our own memories in different ways. Same with our own life stories.
Right. Well, that's interesting you mentioned that. Have you ever, in your journey, come across memory training or memory techniques and been interested in it?
I've always been interested because it's something that's part of my life.
Right.
From having a memory for not only, I suppose, a necessity of from point A to point B, but also the, I suppose, the need to not have that reliance on the iPhones and I suppose other factors around. But I see a lot of people who have great memories who can remember cricket scores and particular dances or particular songs, and that's how they compartmentalize their own memory.
Right. Yeah, I like that idea of compartmentalization. There was a guy I trained many years ago who was 88 at the time, and he said, I hate this word memory palace. And I said, well, come up with another one. And so he called it apartments with compartments. And then after that, he just flew with the techniques. He was hung up on the term. And the idea that everybody has their own way of compartmentalizing, I think, is very important. If you were to describe how you compartmentalize in your memory, is that the word you would use? Or?
Yeah. It's and purely because obviously I'm using so many other senses. I'm not using the visual, sort of photographic, sort of, okay, what does that look like? It's how does it feel? For example, if I'm looking at numbers, okay, how's the number 6 feel? How's the number 7 feel? How's the number 1 feel? It's the same, if I'm doing words, how does that feel to me? And that's why, if you notice in my store, for example, I make chocolate letters.
Yes.
Because I love feeling them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So maybe how would you deal with like a 3-digit number? Would you deal it with one letter at a time, or do you also go into two digits?
No, just got 3, or whole 3, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So just as a not a counter example, but my own example, 117 is Albert Street is your address of the store.
Yeah.
And definitely go to 117 Albert Street to get some chocolate and meet Jared. But what I do there is I think of Tess of the Dubervilles, which is my character for 100 because of the major method, and then 17 is Tack, and sometimes I use a person like Tucker Carlson or Tucker Max, and so I'm not really seeing these images in my head, but I'm thinking of chocolate and like Tucker Carlson with a copy of Tess of the Dubervilles pushing a Tack into some chocolate there, right? And that's what helps me memorize that address.
Whereas for me, I actually visualize the street and sort of visualize where 117 would be on that street.
Okay. So when you say that you visualize that,
yes,
what do you mean?
So I visualize a street,
right?
And I visualize where the actual store is on the actual side, for example, on a particular side of the road,
right?
And that becomes 117.
Okay.
So I'm matching up those. I'm visualizing the street, the store, with the actual number. So I'm using those two sort of components to match it up.
Right. So it's kind of proximity meets a number meets other sort of just experiential senses. So now translate that to you piloting airplanes.
So for me, I had a co-pilot beside me, so they would give me some of the navigational information which I had to remember. But again, that was about the memory, and this is, I suppose, a good factor is about the memory of the feel, how the plane felt. So I was flying a motor glider, which had a 15-meter wingspan, so you could glide as well as fly. And you could use the feel of the wings and remembering that. That would obviously tell you whether the plane was level or not level. And obviously I would use, for example, where the sun was coming into the windscreen. So if we're heading west, obviously the plane was, where the sun's going to be on your shoulder, where it may be, or you could feel the wind. So this is how the wind felt, and when we're heading in this direction. So if I went off course a bit, I could then use obviously that wind and how it felt through the rudder and through the wings to keep in a straight line.
So you actually are feeling the heat of the sun.
The heat of the sun coming through the windscreen, the wind obviously against the wings, and also against the rudder of the plane as well.
So you're touching the window or just
just on the rudder, just through the actual controls of the plane. You could feel it because the wingspan was so long. That gave you. It was almost like having a white cane in the sky. Whereas if the wingspan was very short, it would have been really hard. And that's, for example, when I surf, I use a longboard. Because I can use the sensation of the waves through a longboard, whereas a short surfboard would be very different because that communication is very quick. It doesn't give you other senses that chance to react, to feel what's around you.
Right. So one thing I want to bookmark here for people listening and watching now on the live stream, a lot of what you're talking about resembles something that was lost, which is called ars combinatoria. And it's the art of combination. It's the art of thinking, how big is something? How long is it? What is its depth, its duration, its size, its proximity, and so forth? This just used to be a normal learning technique. So they'd even do this with something like justice. Like, how big is justice? And they would literally do it to help them learn the characteristics of this, even though justice is just a concept and so forth. So I feel like you just had this sort of naturally imported into your experience in some sense. So just sort of want to mention that and check with you if you feel like you're doing a kind of art of combination, if that term makes sense to you.
It does, but also it's being able to selectively remove all the experiences or information that isn't going to be necessarily critical to your own needs in what you're intending to achieve. So, for example, trying to think of your experience. If I was on a bike, and let's say I'm doing a long ride, and there could be some bits of information that I cycle past and I hear or feel, but I know that because I'm only doing that one loop and perhaps never again, I don't need to remember it. So I can just, so it goes into junk mail.
Right.
Okay, so that's not going to be sort of overloading my feelings, my appreciation of what's around me has to be constantly filtered to make sure that the intake I take in is going to be free of any other junk mail that's around, if that makes sense. It's like, almost like a letterbox.
Right.
Okay, so if your mailbox gets full up with junk mail, it gets me hard to get the good stuff in there. So how always has to be clear of the junk mail.
Right. It makes total sense to me, and that's actually one of the reasons I chose magnetic for magnetic memory method. Not just because it attracts what you want to remember, but magnets are a way of repelling what doesn't need to be there, right? So that you have that space to only treat what you want to attract and put it in place. So.
And that also brings back another point too, is the fact of not only what we attract, but in the sense that we also need to be. If I walk out of the office with my guide dog, and I don't know, it could have been a problem with a staff member or something's happened, I need to be free of those emotions. Right. So my mind is clear and available to take in what's around me.
Right.
And that's where people also will, like, for example, how many people have driven home and have no recollection of the last 5 minutes of their drive?
Many.
That's right. Because they've got a memory, but their whole sort of interaction, what's around them, is lost because they're thinking about what happened at work, what's for dinner, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So they're not in the moment. And I have to be, unfortunately.
Mm.
So that's why I would take me, the carbohydrates that I will consume compared to you walking from here to the coffee shop will be very different.
Right, right.
Because I'm using far more energy in the energy that I send out to receive back.
Right. Do you feel that there's any quote unquote spiritual benefit to having that high amount of energy drain because you're so much more present to the world, or?
Oh yeah, most definitely, because you have to be aware of not only your surrounds, but the people that are around you, or what's happening with them, or how they're feeling, and people can visually be, I suppose, taken by the visuals rather than the actual person and what's being, I suppose, put out by them.
Right. Now, I think that there's probably a whole interview to be done just on guide dogs because there's so many memory issues. There must be, first of all, how the dogs learn, then your memories of new dogs as you go throughout your life, and how that must be a whole realm of memory for you as the owner of a guide dog.
Yeah. And dogs are great, I suppose, in their own word association. For example, they have a fantastic memory of the word association, not of what it does and what it is. So, for example, I trained my first guide dog when we walked into the supermarket. Hey, listen, Joey, find the cornflakes. And Joey would find the cornflakes. Now, that was done by its location, its size, and its smell within the supermarket. Had no idea what cornflakes were.
Right.
It was just that word association with what its size, its smell, and its location in the supermarket.
Right.
And it's the same with people who get lost by, I suppose, the other surrounds, and that was a good thing about having a guide dog, because they're just so focused on that one thing. They're not visually distracted by the surrounds.
Right. That's interesting, because it is often disorienting when a store will change things around, and all of a sudden you're just like, wait a second, coffee's over here, and that can persist for a long time.
Yeah.
But that ability to just focus in on the information as such, without this huge story about like what it is, cornflakes and cereal and so forth, will help with that compartmentalization and restructuring and whatnot in the brain, and just get it done much quicker, I assume.
And people also too, I've seen so many people who look for stuff, and they're down down the spices aisle. What the hell are you in a spices aisle? You can smell and you can sense all the spices around you, and you're looking for toilet paper in a spices aisle. Just
amazing. That must be such an interesting experience. Well, tell us a little bit about Boss. He's here today.
Yeah, so Boss is a 5-year-old guide dog. He's my 5th dog. I was the youngest person in Australia to receive a dog. So I was the youngest person to go to high school in central Queensland with my first guide dog, and for them it was about breaking down the various perceptions that people had about not only me obviously being totally blind, but also having a guide dog. And from there, through my various dogs, it's always been about, okay, well, what's their strengths, what's their weaknesses, not only with their memory, but also with their working capacity, with their skill, with their agility. And it's I think thankfully they've all been very different dogs, and they've been fantastic in my life.
Right. He's a black lab?
Yes.
Beautiful dog.
Mm.
I assume though that you weren't able to take a dog with you to summit Everest.
No. So I would never take my dog overseas. I think it's just, from a dog not knowing that environment, it's not really fair on the dog. So I had my own Sherpas, had my own team, and I think not only physically, but also I think from a mental and memory perspective also too, we have teams around us which we can work with to grow our memory, whether it be through yourself and I suppose other people around them, almost like a fitness class. And for me, climbing Everest was again about that memory, both because climbing Everest, getting to the top is difficult, but getting down is actually harder.
Yeah.
And reason being is because I can create a memory in my feet in stepping up onto something, but when you're coming down, creating that feel is entirely different. So when you're stepping down on something, it's very different to stepping up. So that mental memory, what that felt like, was completely new.
Right.
So you're slower coming down on Everest than it is going up Everest.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine climbing it, period.
Yeah.
I come from British Columbia
Yeah.
in Canada, where there's lots and lots of mountains, and I know mountain climbers and so forth, but I don't know the first thing about what must be involved physically, mentally, just the knowledge that you must need to have too, just in terms of air pressure and sort of those kinds of things. How did you begin to prepare for that task?
I learned a lot of both preparation here in Australia from a fitness and also from a skills perspective. I went to Everest in 2003 and back in 2005. So in 2003 it was about creating that memory of, okay, what did it feel like? What were the rocks going to be like? What was the temperature going to be like? What was it like to feel, an ice axe and working with crampons? What was that going to feel like to walk across the ice ladders? For example, to get your crampons across, now not an ice ladder is just a ladder. It's not some sort of specially made ladder. It's one from Bunnings or a local supermarket that the Sherpas put across the crevasses. But you had to make sure that your crampons fitted in between the rails. So you had to make sure you memorize what that felt like to have those crampons securely in between the runs, the ladders, so you took that next step.
Right.
So there was a lot of feel throughout the entire journey, as well as obviously listening out for avalanches. Okay, well, what did it feel like in a sense from a air pressure sound, from a wind sound, from the ice cracking? Had to be aware of that as well. So there was going to be a lot of things I had to remember going back to Everest in 2005. But again, even in 2003, coming down even just up Everest Base Camp was more difficult than going up, because it's the same for a human being who walks into a building. They walk up a set of steps, bang, bang, bang. But coming down, they're always going to be slower because they're having to feel for that step, because they don't have a memory of what that feels like.
Right. Just incredible. I want to hear about a few more things.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Nobel of Life?
Nobel of Life was an award that was put together by an international organisation, and it was for the love of life. So I'm not sure how often they do it, and probably every 3 or 4 years, and they select 12 or 13 people from around the world to receive the Nobel of Life, and I received that back in 2012, and it was just an award you receive for, I suppose, your commitment to life and getting out there. There's a guy who won it from who runs the Rotterdam Zoo. He's has polio, gets around in a wheelchair, runs the whole zoo. There's a lady from Nepal. She only can use her feet. She's written 14 books with her feet.
Wow.
Just grabs the pen between her toes and has written 14 books. So there's a whole range of fabulous stories.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think of, and I don't know the right way to talk about these things, or whatever you might think of, where I'm trying to go here, but a mentor of mine, I get on calls with him, it's very expensive. His name's John Morrow. He has one of the most popular and successful blogs on the internet, and he only has the ability to move his mouth. And I just, like, I don't really care about that, but like, he's just the best at what he does, really, and he's helped me do my work so much, both before it was possible to get on calls with him for years and years, and now especially that it's possible to get that mentorship. But I often think about these kinds of examples when I have perfectly able-bodied people come either asking for a handout, or they come with like some metaphor or way of describing themselves that's obviously self-decapitating, self-denigrating, in other words, a useless approach. And that yet we hear all the time of these people who really have every reason to not write 14 books with their feet, or have a multi-million-dollar business when they can only move their mouth, or climb Everest when...
You're totally blind.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think you're probably the most sighted person I've ever met, and not only in the sense of literally being able to see, because we are talking about seeing the world when you climb Mount Everest, but also the foresight needed to plan for these kinds of, long journeys from here to Cairn or up at the top of a mountain and so forth. Like, it's sight plus. So what advice would you give to me as a trainer of people? And I'm hard on myself, because I just can't stand my own excuses, and I do make them, right? But how would you counsel me to do better for people who are clearly broken inside?
I think it's about definitely it's about looking at the about looking at the gaps in between the obstacles. We all can have the same obstacles which we can see very easily, and also I carry with me everywhere I go as part of, I suppose, my journey, and that's where is it? Probably the bottom of my bag, but I carry with me everywhere I go something which I will never ever use in my life. It's in the bottom of the bag, but I carry a mirror with me everywhere I go.
A mirror?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the reason I carry a mirror is that what you put in is exactly what you get back. So when you walk into the bathroom in the morning and you give it a grimace, it gives one back.
Right.
And walk in there and you give it a smile, it gives one back. So when I go to the pool and I'm there at 4:30 in the morning, I know that what I put in is exactly what I get back. It's the same with my team. I have a team of eight coaches.
Right.
Not eight. and the reason being is because they're all there from my different parts of the triathlon. Well, I have a head overall coach. I have I have two for swimming. I have one for cycling. I have one for the actual triathlon courses and yada yada yada. And it's about that team. And for me, they're there. I don't pay them. Okay, they're there purely because they believe what I believe, and my belief is obviously getting to 2020, and they can look at the opportunities. They don't say, "Hey, listen, Gerrard Gosens, you're blind and you're X years of old." They say, "Okay, you're looking at the opportunities, so we'll believe in you."
Amazing. Well, speaking of that mirror, what you put in, you get out. Tell us a little bit about your charitable activities.
Look, I still have a lot to do there, but I've obviously fundraised a lot for charities throughout my life, and haven't always would be working with charities or working with young kids. A lot of kids who are blind have low vision from a sporting perspective, giving them advice and working with them, helping with their triathlons or running or various pursuits. Or even now, I'm actually patron Australia-wide for International Day for People with Disability. So for the federal government, I'm travelling around. Like next week, I've got a few functions in Melbourne and Sydney where I'm sort of presenting at for people with disability and as patron for the actual day, which is on the 3rd of December. And last Saturday I was working with the power wheelchair football. So that's people who have quadriplegia, and they use their wheelchair. They have like a guard on the front of their wheelchair that flicks the soccer ball, and they played it here in Brisbane last weekend. So yeah, I'm always sort of working with various charities and non-profits.
Oh, that's wonderful. And also, I want to hear a little bit about Max Employment.
Yeah.
What's your involvement in this?
So I'm project manager with Max. Max actually is one of the largest government providers in the world. So in the US, we have what's called Maximus, and we have about 10,000 staff in the US. We have several thousand in Canada. In Australia, we have 2,500 staff, and in Saudi Arabia and also the UK. So I'm a project manager here in Australia. I also look after our Max Foundation. Our staff contribute to help out charities around Australia. And being a project manager, we have 250 offices in Australia, so we provide employment services, health services, physios, a whole range of services for the federal government. So I've been with them now for a few years, and previous to that I was executive officer for the Australian Paralympic Committee for 10 years, as well as obviously competing as an athlete. So I've been around for a while in CEO roles and deputy CEO roles, and I think for me, I began the Paralympic Committee in Queensland from my back bedroom with a laptop computer and a bubble jet printer. And talking from a memory perspective, there were some frustrating moments there when you would print out a document on a bubble jet printer, and if you walked across to the fax machine, which was back then the main form of communication, quick communication, and if you dropped that piece of paper, let's say it was 4 or 5 of them, you had no idea whether it was up the right way or around the wrong way. So you want to fax a blank piece of paper, so back to the printer and print it out again. But those are facts of life. Yeah. And the fact of life is that you're going to go to the kitchen next week and boil your cup of coffee, boil your water, put your coffee in the cup, go to the fridge, no milk. It's a fact of life.
Right.
And so many people, through their own window attitude, get so choked up with the facts of life. A fact of life is that my goblins are going to make mistakes, and they're going to run me into parked cars and trees and posts and poles. That's a fact of life.
Right.
They're the obstacles, okay? But I have to look at the gaps and think, well, they're going to have good days. They're going to have days where they actually are focused and aren't going to run me into a parked car.
Right. Yeah. Well, I love that. That fact of life phrase is so powerful and empowering for all people, and it is definitely a fact of life that I'm grateful for this time today, and that chance, which is another fact of life, that chance exists, brought us in the same place that we met and created this opportunity. So where can people learn more about you and find you and follow you if they care to do so, and get news of your book when it comes out?
So I have an Instagram, Gerrard Gosens, as well as obviously they can look at chocolatemoments.com.au, and on Facebook. So I'm out and about and always obviously competing for Australia. So my goal now is next year have the World Championships and a whole range of internationals, and then once 2020 is over, I can retire as an athlete and keep focused on all my other challenges that will arise, no doubt.
Excellent. Well, we'll have the links for all of that on the page with this episode. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that ends the interview. And now we're still on the live stream. So let's just check in and see if we got some chats here. We've had people coming and going. Brunheimer was here. I don't know if he's still here. It's not letting me go back to the whole live stream. But for those of you who are still with us, if you haven't hit that thumbs up yet, put the thumbs up now. Reclaiming Life is here. He says, this is the most awesome chat I've been waiting for with the blind guy who is into memory as well. Is that the one you met with your wife in a cafe? That was at Moments Chocolate, 117 Albert Street.
Chocolate Moments.
Chocolate Moments, sorry. Every time that I get on this live thing, I end up reversing my words. I think that's called a spoonerism.
Right.
Or something like this. Reclaiming Life says, you got my thumbs up. Anyone should give it if they haven't yet. Thank you for that. Brunheimer is here still. Yes, great. So if you have any questions, let us know. I know you sometimes are driving when you're watching this and can't type or chat or whatever, but I just am overjoyed that we were able to live stream it. I probably should have put a little thing that said we're recording the interview, but they have, James is here. Hello, James. Thanks for saying hello. They have these character restrictions on the internet everywhere, and you can only put so many things, and we kind of just did this spontaneously after I asked you if we could do the live stream. But
I suppose a question for you is,
okay.
Let's say, for example, I say to you, what does the color red feel like to you? What does it feel like to you?
What does it feel like?
Yes.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is silk and the wind. And I guess part of why has more to do with recency in my life than anything to do with red, because I'm thinking of the Chinese flag, which was the country I was in before coming to Australia, and also just my wife's fascination with red.
Yeah.
So I think of those kinds of things.
So it's interesting how we all can have our own memories around even just as simple as a colour.
Right.
Some people might say, red is love. Some people might say it's anger. Some people might say it's passionate. Some people might say, for example, particularly you might say, okay, white is icy because it's snow. Where some people might say it's fluffy.
Right.
Or some people might say it's pure.
Right.
It's how we have those memories around those learned values and beliefs and experiences.
That's interesting. Reclaiming Life, he just said red equals hot, which is certainly another thing.
Yes.
There's the band Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. There's just a wide range of potential things. And like I said, I sort of went with recency when you asked that. And then a great brain exercise and a memory exercise for memory fitness is then playing through the chains of associations. So from Red Hot Chili Peppers, I might go to the real Red Hot Chili Peppers, and then I might ask you, oh, do you ever put chili peppers on chocolate?
Yeah, or red tomatoes.
Or red tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
And then, you could just go wild to think of, like, movies that involve red. And,
one of the most overrated cake in the world being red velvet.
Red velvet cake,
Why would you eat red velvet? It just tastes like nothing.
What about for you? What does red bring up?
Oh, definitely heat. Because that's a very easy thing, orange being warm, blue being cold, white being freezing. There are very different ways, black being a very cold, very empty colour, something like walking into a tunnel, because that's the memory, that's the experience that you actually have. So we're always going to have those certain memories around experiences, and for example, a person might have a certain memory around about a certain memory. I can smell a barbecue, and they always bring back those memories, those experiences, what they had as perhaps potentially as a kid or as a family member with those smells, and that's what I have to do as a person who's totally blind, is use those things. Even for example, when I'm doing kilometre reps on the road, if I'm running past a bush that's, let's say, so for example, it's coming to spring and the mock orange trees, okay, and if I'm running past it and, okay, well that's the 800 metre mark, so I can use that as a drop of dopamine,
right,
because I know I've got 200 metres to go.
Nice, okay, that's cool. Let's see here. Reclaiming Life says red tomatoes and chili peppers are not good on red velvet cake. That's just created a great. That's a great created memory from just now. Yeah. Well. Awesome. Well, I know that you are opening a second store now, or dealing with with this. So I want to be cautious around your time, but really appreciate this today, and I know that the people who were able to be with us live appreciate it as well. And there's the replay, of course, and. Just really grateful for all of this, and hope to see you again very soon.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks everybody who is here. If you're watching that replay, hit the thumbs up, get subscribed if you're not subscribed, and we'll talk to you very soon. We'll be publishing this podcast soon. I got to send it to Ali for all the mastering and so forth. Reclaiming Life says thank you. He's been looking forward to this. Brunheimer says thanks. Thank you, Brunheimer, for his strategy. Brunheimer's in the masterclass training that I offer, and I think Reclaiming Life is also. I gotta definitely check in. Sometimes I don't know everybody's real name, which is always interesting. But thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you soon. And the next thing we're gonna do is, I think the next video we'll do. Oh, Brunheimer said he sent me a pic today. Great. I think the next thing we're gonna do is the video on the human GPS, but it might be something about Evernote. But Reclaiming says yes, I am too, William. Okay, I gotta remember that. Excellent. Always good to see the masterclass Magnetic Mary Method family. And again, 117 Albert Street is the store I've been to in Brisbane. The most amazing chocolate I've ever had. And so if you're into chocolate, you will be into
chocolate moments.
Chocolate moments. I can't get this backwards again. But it's just a wonderful, wonderful store, and absolutely an honor and a privilege. So thanks everybody, and until we speak again, keep yourself magnetic.